We are T minus 72 hours and change away from the unprecedented spectacle of a sitting American president debating a former American president, the latter of whom, just to spice things up, also happens to be a 34-time convicted criminal, 34-time convicted crook, a scofflaw with 34 scarlet Fs scrawled across his rap sheet. If Donald Trump, the felon in question, gets his way, the first and maybe only presidential debate of 2024 this Thursday in Atlanta will be less Lincoln Douglas or even Kennedy Nixon than Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Those are wrestlers, for the record. Remember, the chain of events that led President Biden to be facing off against a felon ran through the Manhattan criminal courthouse via the hush money case brought against Donald Trump by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who has received a litany of heinous threats. Threats that the Manhattan DA's office argued were, quote, directly connected to Trump's dangerous rhetoric. And yet, in one of the other venues where the former president is facing grave legal peril, the wheels of justice appear to be spinning very, very slowly, possibly in reverse. That venue is the federal courtroom in Florida, where Judge Eileen Cannon is at this very moment hearing arguments in the classified documents case, including over the question of whether to modify the bond conditions of Trump's release and a special request from special counsel Jack Smith, quote, for a gag order limiting the former president's rhetoric about FBI agents involved in the case. That's a reference to when back in May, Trump, quote, twisted the meaning of boilerplate instructions to FBI agents about limits on their use of lethal force, and instead accused the Department of Justice of authorizing the use of deadly force during the Mar-a-Lago search. Or as Trump put it in a fundraising email to his supporters, quote, President Biden was locked and loaded, ready to take me out. Now, that is precisely the kind of rhetoric and distortion that Donald J. Trump is known for, and it's also precisely why Jack Smith believes that Trump has earned himself a grade A USDA choice beef top shelf gag order, an argument that he laid out in a withering filing ahead of today's hearing. Quote, in late May 2024, Donald Trump made a series of false and inflammatory public statements about the law enforcement professionals who conducted the court-authorized search at Mar-a-Lago, telling his audience that the FBI was out to kill him and his family. The quote goes on. Trump knew that this was false, and he intended that his comments would inflame his listeners. Indeed, that was the whole purpose. There is no question that his statements were intentionally false, that they were designed to inflame and anger his audience, and that he knew that his statements would do so. Every court to have examined the issue has recognized the threat caused by the longstanding and well-documented dynamic between Trump's comments and the predictable response from some of his supporters. Quote continues, here, common human experience leaves no question of the imminently foreseeable harm posed by Trump's knowingly false and inflammatory accusation of an FBI plot to murder him and his family. Three of those words bear repeating. Imminently foreseeable harm. That was posed by Trump's knowingly false and inflammatory accusations. And that is where we start this hour with former top official at the Department of Justice and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, plus U.S. Senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast. Man, it's awesome. Claire McCaskill and former Republican Congressman and MSNBC political analyst David Jolly. MSNBC's Katie Phang is inside that Florida courthouse, and we hope to have her join us as soon as she's able. Andrew Weissmann, I start with you, as I always do. It's a matter of common courtesy and deference to your genius. What's going on down there in Florida today?
Well, one of the things people should know is that the way that Judge Cannon runs her courtroom, in contrast to the Judge Merchan courtroom, is that there are no laptops, there's no telephones, nothing that you can use to communicate. So that's why it's slower than when we had the ability to get immediate tweets and information from Judge Merchan's courtroom from the insiders who were there. So we know that both on Friday and this morning, she heard an issue about the constitutionality of the appointment of the special counsel. That's an issue that has been decided by every court that has addressed it against the people challenging the appointments of special counsels, whether Republicans or Democrats. And then this afternoon is the very, very belated oral argument that the judge scheduled on, John, what you affirmed as the changing of the bail conditions to impose additional restrictions on what the former president can say. And that's one also, when you think about that, how that's been addressed in D.C. and in New York, we have had a situation where the former president has needed to be under a gag order because of these, as you put it, his false statements that pose imminent harm to people either who are witnesses, jurors, court staff, or prosecution staff. So we'll see what Judge Cannon does. One thing I am keeping my eye out for is if she does not rule for the government here, I can easily see them taking this up to the Court of Appeals to get it reversed for a third time.
Andrew, I follow you relentlessly and religiously on Twitter, and I saw a tweet of yours that talked about the state of affairs at Aileen Cannon's courtroom. You compared it to Judge Merchan's. Judge Merchan, you thought ran a really tight ship, right? Right? Well done.
Absolutely.
Right.
First-rate judge.
First-rate judge who ran a first-rate courtroom. Aileen Cannon, not so much. Here's the tweet. A tweet where you likened Cannon's courtroom to being so backed up. In this case, it's like planes over LaGuardia on a holiday. I will say it's a very New York thing that shows your New York roots. I would, for people in the Midwest would say it backed up like planes over O'Hare, but it's a similar idea. I ask you the question I ask you all the time about Aileen Cannon as you talk about her. It's the inescapable question. Politically biased, bozo, or both?
Boy, it's this like that game show where it's, do you want behind the curtain or within the box? So I actually think it's both. There's no question she is inexperienced, and she does not have the tools to handle a case that's this complicated. That's clear. There's, everyone's seen that. We also do have the fact that the 11th Circuit, a conservative circuit that she is in, reversed her not once but twice. And those were conservative judges who just thought she was absolutely bonkers in terms of her rulings. And of course, both times that she was overturned, her rulings were for Trump. It's not like she's inexperienced and sometimes she gets it right for Trump and sometimes she gets it right or wrong for the government. They're always siding with Donald Trump, and it's very, very hard at this point to see her as being anything other than partisan. Let me just give you one reason that I and other people are particularly perturbed about the timing of her scheduling this argument on the gag order. The government raised this issue almost a month ago with her saying that there's a real concern about danger to law enforcement from these false statements. And she initially rejected the filing. She said it needs to be refiled because you didn't, yes, you conferred with the other side, which is required, but I don't think you conferred enough. So she actually bounced the filing and said, you need to confer enough. That was sort of meaningless because, of course, the other side didn't agree to it. They never were going to agree to it. They said they didn't agree to it. And so that delayed it. And then she put it on this very slow trajectory where we finally are today having this heard. Can you imagine? The allegations are that law enforcement is being harmed here. There's a grave risk of harm. Even if she thought ultimately she was going to rule against the government, you would want to hear that as soon as humanly possible. It just shows such incredible cavalier attitudes about safety, and that cavalier attitude about safety is what got her reversed twice in the 11th Circuit, where they said she was showing really cavalier attitudes towards the national security of the United States. So again, I think it's worth really keeping an eye on this, because if she does not rule for the government, this is one where it easily could go up on appeal.
Claire, Andrew is perturbed, particularly perturbed. Out in the show me state, do people get perturbed, or do you guys have a different word for that?
Well, gobsmacked. I think the lawyers that are watching this, and particularly the other federal judges that are watching this, are all like, what in the world? I mean, this woman has a serious case of robitis, and robitis is a disease that inflicts a federal judge. Once they get the lifetime appointment, they forget that they are accountable to anyone, and even not accountable to the people who appear in front of them, the lawyers who appear in front of them. Let me give you an example how nuts this is. People file a friend of the court brief many times on various issues. Typically, they are only looked at and potentially maybe argued at the appellate level. This woman, on an issue that has been litigated over and over again about the constitutionality of a special counsel, she's letting people who filed briefs come in and argue in front of her like she's a Supreme Court judge or something. I mean, it's just beyond weird. I mean, no question, it looks like she's in the tank. It may turn out that she's not. But the appearance of impropriety here, not just with her timing, her failure to act, but the rulings she's made. And as Andrew says, when you get reversed twice by a really conservative appellate court, you start paying attention, because no judge likes being reversed, even one who doesn't know what she's doing.
David Jolly, I come to you as I believe the sole Floridian, or at least Florida resident on this panel, and I won't make you try to defend all the things that are going on in your state, including in this courtroom. But I will read to you from the Wall Street Journal and ask you what you think about this. 3 days of hearing palooza. Here's a quote that I found quite gobsmacking, I believe was Claire's word. I'm with that. Quote, at a hearing on Friday, Eileen Cannon, Judge Cannon, took the unusual step of allowing a Texas law professor and 2 other lawyers unaffiliated with the case, to argue on whether the special counsel behind the prosecution, Jack Smith, was unlawfully appointed. She cut off the law professor, Josh Blackman, as he quoted a line from the Spider-Man comics and later nudged him to finish his argument. I do want to let you wrap up, she said. So she basically is kind of letting these clowns into the courtroom, and then being shocked that they're wearing that they have bozo noses and fright wigs. What say you about the state of things in this courtroom in your state?
I think the greatest gift for Eileen Cannon is there's no cameras in the courtroom, because it is clear, as Andrew and Claire have said, it's clear to a layperson she's unqualified, at least for this case. Maybe her credentials prepared her for the bench, but she's very new to the bench, and she is absolutely unqualified for this case. And so how does she cover that? What it seems she's doing is saying, well, then I'm going to be exceedingly thorough. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to listen to everybody. Also, perhaps politically knowing that favors Donald Trump's fortunes if in the end he indeed is elected president. I think that, the lightning bolt last week that came out says everything, that the senior judge, the chief judge, suggested that she recuse herself and let a more experienced judge take the case, and yet she went ahead and did it. I think another glaring sign is in the Jack Smith filing you just read from, where it talks about the imminency of threat. The crux of his case, his argument, actually relies not on law, but he says common human experience tells us that Donald Trump's rhetoric is violent and would incite violence. That's basically saying, Judge Eileen Cannon, don't overthink this or over-lawyer or over-judge this. Common sense would tell you this. And maybe if Eileen Cannon is paying the least bit of attention to anything outside of her courtroom, she might realize that the common sense of America is looking at her saying, what are you doing? Because it is obvious that you're unprepared for this moment.
Andrew, Ty Cobb, the lawyer, not the baseball player, who worked for Donald Trump for a period of time and now criticizes him frequently and has the most excellent mustache known to man, was on television the other day making an argument that I'd like you to hear and react to. So let's play that.
The worst thing that could happen to her is that she actually does rule for Trump on this, because that would go to the 11th Circuit. And then I think this, petty partisan prima donna would be put in her place and they would remove her.
Andrew, he's gone full Santa Claus. He's not just the mustache, but the beard on Ty Cobb now. What do you make of that argument? The notion that in the way that Cannon has been bending over backwards to favor Trump, it could end up backfiring on her.
I totally agree. Ty Cobb's an excellent lawyer. Leave aside the way he dresses and in his alliteration. I mean, his point here is absolutely right. This is an issue that is serious. You go into law enforcement. You are at the Department of Justice to take seriously threats to civilians, threats to law enforcement. If Judge Cannon knew what she was doing, she would really put it to the Trump team to say, isn't it a fact that what you said is false? And make them really defend on the issue of isn't there sort of a knowing and imminent harm here? If she rules for Trump, it is the kind of issue. The reason you are in law enforcement is to protect people. The idea that this would not be taken up to the 11th Circuit seems really remote to me. I sort of put myself in, what would I do in that situation? You would do everything you can to protect people in law enforcement the way that you try to protect witnesses and jurors and court staff. And this is the kind of thing that it doesn't take a conservative or a liberal judge. It's sort of should be a bipartisan issue on the 11th Circuit, that this is the kind of thing that will really show her incompetence, both in terms of the substance for ruling and, as I mentioned, the timing of it, that she waited so long to hear this matter.
We are now just days away from what, to this point in the presidential campaign, is the most highly anticipated event of the 2024 cycle. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump set to face off in the first and earliest ever presidential debate on Thursday in Atlanta at CNN. The two are taking really wildly different approaches to their preparations, but not surprisingly different. President Biden spending the days leading up to the matchup in Atlanta at Camp David with all of his senior aides rehearsing, reportedly, including his attorney, Bob Bauer, playing the part again of Donald Trump. He did that back in 2020. And according to reporting in the New York Times today, quote, Biden aides view the debate as the starting bell for the general election, an event that will provide a high-profile opportunity to define the terrain of the contest. Meanwhile, the disgraced, now 34-time criminally convicted ex-president, also twice impeached, by the way, is not taking part in any known formal debate practice, preparations, mock debates, none of that. Instead, Trump has chosen to hit the campaign trail, where he's been making a number of, like those Trump statements, unhinged, out there, hard to follow. But as Biden campaign co-chair Mitchell Andrew reminded all of us, there is some other preparation that Trump needed to do before taking the stage on Thursday.
The fact of the matter is that the sky is blue sometimes, and Donald Trump is a convicted felon. And the American people have to sit in that for a second. The person who wants to be president has to go sit with his probation officer before he actually goes to the debate.
That's a good point. Joining us at the table, NBC News correspondent, the one, the only, Vaughn Hilliard. He is here with me at this table. I couldn't be happier. Claire and David are also back, but they are not here. Vaughn, what do you know about the? I love debate prep. Right. One of my favorite things. I love to know about what's going on the inside. I like to know about the mocks and the prep and all the stuff. What do you got?
Okay, well, how about this? You just outlined what Joe Biden's looks like.
Yeah.
And to our understanding, at least what the campaign is telling us, is that Donald Trump's looks very different. That he is doing no mock debate, that he has nobody standing in as Joe Biden. Of course, 4 years ago, he had his one-time ally, Chris Christie, doing that. Right. And this is at least publicly what they are saying. And they are building up that Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, is somebody that doesn't need to do this, that he doesn't need to go through a rehearsal. That is a campaign advisor saying that, because he is out there every day, either on the campaign trail or talking with advisors or talking to right-wing media, and that he does not need to rehearse his answers, in contrast to Joe Biden, the way that they're presenting it, and that he's going to be ready to go on Thursday. He left Bedminster, his club in New Jersey today, is going to a fundraiser in New Orleans. He's got nothing on the public calendar the next couple of days, of course, until Thursday night in Atlanta.
I can tell you, Vaughn, that having written some about debate preparations in previous presidential campaigns, I know exactly what's going on in the Joe Biden's world. Ron Klain, who is like the guru of Democratic debate prep, he's been doing it for years and years. There's nobody better, rigorous, attention to detail, methodical, running mock sessions, filming them, style coaches, all kinds of stuff going on. Donald Trump's people, according to you, say, hey, we don't need this because the guy's out there on the campaign trail. He's tuning up on the campaign trail. This is what he's doing on the campaign trail. Let's play that.
And I have the wounds all over my body If I took this shirt off, you'd see a beautiful, beautiful person. But you'd see wounds all over me. I've taken a lot of wounds, I can tell you. More than I suspect any president ever. And my stupid people, when I wanted to refute it, they said, sir, don't dignify it with a refutal. Refutal or a refutal? What the hell word would that be? Refutal? What they'll say, he didn't know, refutal or refutal, but they don't know either. As you know, it's been reported that right now Crooked Joe's gone to a log cabin to study, prepare. No, he didn't. He's sleeping now. Because they want to get him good and strong, so a little before debate time he gets a shot in the and that's... They want to strengthen him up.
But first, just for anybody who does, the word refutal is actually a word. It's not, he didn't confuse it with rebuttal. That is actually a word. I looked it up this morning because I thought I wasn't really sure, but it turns out it is a word. Claire, there's so much to say about that, in addition to the wholly objectionable beginning of it, which involves raising the specter of having to look at Donald Trump without his shirt on. I ask you, what do you expect in the context, given what we know about Trump, what we know about Biden, which is a lot at this point? What are you expecting to see on Thursday night? I don't think much of this preparation stuff. We know what we're going to get from Biden. I think at least some version of what he's going to try to do. Trump is totally unpredictable. But what are you looking for that night? What are you thinking? This is what we're going to see.
Well, I think what we're going to see is Joe Biden focusing on contrast, and I think we're going to see, as my friend Jim Palmieri said on our podcast, scrappy Joe from Scranton. He doesn't respect Donald Trump, and I don't think he's afraid to take some swings, and he needs to. What he says is less important than how he says it. He needs to pull up Trump short when Trump starts doing some of his most outrageous things, and we know he will. And listen, don't kid yourself. The Trump staff would love for their candidate to have enough discipline to actually prepare something. They would love it if he would actually sit down for 10 minutes and think about how to strategize this debate. But Trump's ego won't let him act like he needs help from anybody. So he's going to get up there and he's going to lie from the opening gun till the end. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are going to have their hands full just trying to hold him to account in terms of fact checks. And I hope that Joe Biden just takes a moment to show people that he can be a street fighter. We need the State of the Union Joe Biden, not the dignified presidential Joe Biden. That's what we need on Thursday night.
David Jolly, I can tell you that at least back in 2016, when Trump tried to do debate preparation, most of those sessions out of Bedminster revolved around a lot of discussion about the hot dogs there and whether how many hot dogs you could have and what the condiments were and all that kind of stuff. I'll also note that I really want to ask you this question. Trump says Biden's going to be on drugs, and Ronnie Johnson, according to Trump, whose actual name is Ronnie Jackson, Trump very mentally fit, forgot the man's name. Ronnie Jackson, doubled down on that conspiracy theory. Says Joe Biden's going to be all cranked up on some kind of drugs. Would you want to play that game if you were Donald Trump? Would you want to go take a drug test alongside Joe Biden before the debate if you were Donald Trump? And what are beyond that question, what do you think is the strategic imperative in this debate for Joe Biden?
Yeah, no, everything with Donald Trump is projection, and certainly with Ronnie Jackson as well. They're not two people who should be suggesting drug testing for anybody. But let me start with Mitch Landrieu's comments, John, because this is serious. I was screaming into the wilderness a little bit when this happened, but I don't think the debate should happen Thursday night. I think the day that Donald Trump got convicted of felonies, the day he became an adjudicated criminal, the Biden camp should have pulled out and said it's beneath the presidency to debate a criminal. Now, it's too little too late for that. But part of what we are seeing is the normalizing. I mean, this is serious. It has serious consequences. This is the normalizing of Donald Trump, the criminal candidate, putting him on stage with Joe Biden. And I think it's a strategic decision that they made. Clearly, Mitch Landrieu now is asking people to remember he's a felon. But the way to do that is to say we're not debating a criminal. Now, for Thursday night itself, short of a medical episode, I don't think anything that happens Thursday night by either candidate would change the direction of this race. But I think it will affirm the contours of it. And what I mean by that is I think Joe Biden will overperform. As Claire said, like he did at the State of the Union, he's always underestimated and he always overperforms. And I think Donald Trump will be Donald Trump. And that helps Joe Biden. because the contours of this race make it very hard for Donald Trump to build a majority coalition, because the voters he needs to bring back to him are people who don't like him, right? If you're not MAGA, you don't like Donald Trump. It's one of the reasons you went with Joe Biden and Democrats in 18 and 20 and 22. So if Thursday night is chaotic and chaos, I think that helps Joe Biden. I think it's a tragedy for the country to see, but I think Biden will perform well. Donald Trump will remind voters who he is, and that will hurt Joe Biden, or that will hurt Donald Trump.
We got to go to a break, but I want to ask you, there are a number of things to unpack in what David just said. But one of them is this question, which has been kicked around ever since Trump was convicted. The notion that, he's a convicted felon now, look, the Biden people should walk away. Just talk about the political calculus there. I mean, I think there's like a moral, ethical, normative argument to be made for that. And yet, I think if you talk to people in the Biden campaign, they would say, this race is too close to walk away and give Donald Trump the argument he most desperately wants, which is the argument he's running on. Me strong, you weak, Joe Biden afraid to debate me. I think that's not an argument they wanted to cede to him.
And the interesting part, too, is over the 7-week trial, there were some conversations of the fact that the Biden campaign was silent about the testimony that was coming out from Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels. It was a calculated decision by the Biden campaign outside of bringing Robert De Niro to Lower Manhattan. There was quietness, and they were going to wait for a verdict. And so that's exactly what happened. They waited for those 12 jurors to make their decision. They found Donald Trump guilty of all of those felonies, and they're allowing those jurors to make that determination. And clearly, Joe Biden intends to use it.
Getting it back to the states puts the question where it belongs, with the vote of the people, and over time, it will all work out. It's working out right now, but it's all going to work out, and it's where everybody wanted it, including the legal scholars, but it's where everybody wanted it to be.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the 5 o'clock hour here in Gotham City. I'm John Heilman, in for Nicole Wallace. Exactly 2 years ago today, the U.S. Supreme Court, thanks in large part to Donald Trump stacking it with conservative justices, took away a woman's federal right to an abortion, a right they'd had for nearly half a century. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a cascade of laws around the country banning or limiting abortion came down. Some states enacting full bans, others banning abortions as early into pregnancy as 6 weeks, a time when many women do not yet know whether they are pregnant. So very contrary to what the disgraced ex-president said this weekend. The consequences of this decision are not, quote, where everyone wanted it to be. They have been dire and they have been scary for women and the men who love them in this country. Women have been close to death because of these restrictions, unable to get the care they need, forced to carry unviable pregnancies to term or travel across state lines to get basic medical help. What we've seen in the past 2 years is that the American public does not want that reality and has rejected it in almost every case. In states where abortion access has been put on the ballot, in Kansas and Kentucky and Ohio and others, voters have consistently chosen to protect women's reproductive rights. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to that phenomenon in a new interview exclusive with our colleague Mika Brzezinski.
If you look at where the American people were in so-called red states and so-called blue states, every time this issue of abortion was on the ballot, the people voted for freedom. That's who the American people are. Right? We have our differences, but the American people believe in the integrity of our country and our values, which include that we protect and fight for individual freedoms and liberties.
The Biden-Harris re-election campaign has made safeguarding abortion access a cornerstone of its effort, hoping it will galvanize Americans to vote in November. According to Planned Parenthood data provided to NBC News, quote, nearly 28 million women of reproductive age live in states with partial or total bans on abortion. Several states with partial bans could prove decisive for presidential contenders in November, including Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, battleground states all. Today, on the second anniversary of the overturning of Roe, Democrats are hammering home the contrast between the two presumptive presidential nominees, one who wants to protect women's freedoms and one who is the reason, one of the main reasons, why this freedom was taken away. Here is more from Vice President Harris speaking earlier in College Park, Maryland.
This is a health care crisis, and we all know who was to blame: Donald Trump. And Trump has not denied, much less shown remorse for his actions. Instead, he, quote, proudly takes credit for overturning Roe. My fellow Americans, in a court of law, that would be called an admission. And some would say a confession, all pointing to the ultimate issue. In the case of the stealing of reproductive freedom from the women of America, Donald Trump is guilty.
The politics of women's reproductive health is where we start this hour with Michelle Goodwin, Georgetown Law School professor and author of Policing the Womb, Invisible Women and the Criminalization of Motherhood, plus U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC Studios and MSNBC contributor Katty Kay, and Democratic strategist and director of public policy programming at Hunter College, MSNBC political analyst Basil Smokey. Michelle, start with you. Just give us the 30,000 foot here on the contrast between these two nominees, familiar figures, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, on this very central issue, both to women's lives and to our politics today.
Both have made their concerns in this regard very clear. Before the presidency of 2016, when Donald Trump was running, he promised to punish women who wanted to have abortions. He has boasted about creating a federal bench that delivered on that and more, stripping away Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, and of course, creating just mayhem across the country. We've seen cases of a 10-year-old having to flee one state to get to another in order to terminate a pregnancy. There are girls that are going into elementary and middle school now as mothers. There are women who have been bleeding out on the sides of roads. There are doctors who've even had to flee their states in order to be able to terminate pregnancies. We've seen the Supreme Court of Arizona leaning back to an 1864 abortion ban. We've seen the Supreme Court of Alabama say that embryos now have constitutional personhood and are children. On the other hand, we have Joe Biden, who has come forward and said he will do all that he possibly can, not only to make sure that reproductive health care access is available for abortion, but also a commitment to saving women's lives. The U.S. has the highest rate of maternal mortality of any peer nation. So Joe Biden has made very clear that it is a reproductive justice message. It is about access to contraception, access to pregnancy termination when one needs that, and being able to, frankly, survive pregnancies in the United States, which is not a guarantee for all women, and especially women of color and Black women.
Katty Kay, if you mark the beginning of the Trump era in American politics as January 2017, when he was still the president-elect and not yet president, and then when he came into office, the two defining features, I'd say, of that era have been Donald Trump and his lunacy and criminality on one side, and women rising into a different place in American politics, from the initial Women's March back in January of 2017 until today, in the streets, at the ballot box, across the board. Talk a little bit about that and why, in some ways, it is the most predictable and maybe apt thing in the world that we're looking at an election right now in which the power of women could turn out to be decisive in November.
Yeah, I mean, women have decided I think it's the last 6 American presidential elections, they vote in bigger numbers than men. Women in minority groups have a huge amount of sway over who gets elected to the White House. So it's not necessarily a new phenomenon that women have had a lot of power when it comes to the ballot box. They are the deciders in this country. I think the question coming into November is going to be whether this issue, which has motivated so many women, but also men around the country, and the polling on men in this issue is very interesting. We've seen this in, Kentucky and Ohio and Kansas, that actually it's been men turning out as well. But when it comes to the election in November, people are going to be weighing the issue of abortion against a whole host of other issues. And I think that's where the polling gets more complicated for Democrats. We've seen it in the referendums time and again. The pro-choice movement has won in all of those, even conservative states. But will that be the same when it comes to a national election, when people are weighing abortion rights against immigration, against the economy, against inflation? Where will they rank it then? And will it be enough to push Democrats to power in some of those swing states?
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.